Oh, thank you.
Louis, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Hey, thank you.
Many would say he's Torrance's most famous son. The city named its airfield after him, as well as the Torrance High School track.
He's my hero, and he's always been my hero. He's a hero for everyone in Torrance as far as I'm concerned. We love him.
When he visits, crowds gather for a handshake, an autograph, and to hear his famous story.
He's been like a really big inspirational figure for all of us, like to always overcome your obstacles, and you can overcome anything.
It was nearly 78 years ago that Louis Zamperini made history breaking the world record for the high school mile right here on the Torrance High track. But before he ever set foot here, he already made a big impression in Torrance, not running races, but dodging the police.
Then I started school in Torrance and began to get in trouble.
Zamperini was born to Italian immigrants. His family moved to Torrance in his youth and lived in this home at 2028 Gramercy Place. Because his family spoke mostly Italian, Zamperini had an accent, and the kids in the neighborhood made fun of him. He started to act out, and Trouble became his middle name.
Chief Calder, who took me to jail, pointed through the bars and said, "See those two guys? Someday you're going to be in there." And that shook me up.
At Torrance High School, the principal and Zamperini's older brother Pete contrived a plan to straighten Louis' path. They signed him up for track, and once Zamperini started running, he left his troublemaking past at the starting line.
And as I came down the stretch and passed a member of the Narbonne track team, I could hear the students from this school cheering me on, you know, and this was unbelievable. I had no idea that anyone even knew my name, and they were hollering, "Come on, Louis." Well, that did it. I made my mind up that night to stop all this dissipation and become a runner.
And not just any runner. Sports writers began calling him the Torrance Tornado.
We used to watch the track meets, and here would be Louis. He'd be probably 100, 200 yards ahead of everybody else. Then the rest of the field would come.
In May 1934, Zamperini was a junior competing at the high school state finals. He unleashed his trademark kick and set a new world record for the high school mile at 4:21, a record that would stand for 26 years. 2 years later, at 19, Zamperini boarded a train for the U.S. Olympic trials in New York City. It was just 1 month before the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. His hometown, that had once written him off as a delinquent, sent him off in style.
The city of Torrance, the businessmen, gave me a suitcase, they gave me shaving gear, cologne, clothing. I mean, this city was behind me 100%. And I had my dad worked for the Southern Pacific Railway, so I had a free ticket once a year anywhere in America. So I took advantage of that, got a train to New York.
At the 5,000-meter trials, Zamperini ran stride for stride with world record holder Don Lash during the last 100 meters of the race. They tied for first, and Zamperini secured his spot on the U.S. Olympic team.
We never had an Olympian before. We never had a world record holder before.
Word spread back home in Torrance, and the police, who once chased Louis across town, were now cheering him on.
The same chief sent me a wire, which I still have, in New York when I made the Olympic team. Congratulations, Louis.
But when he arrived in Berlin, he wasn't quite prepared for his big race.
I gained 14 pounds, by the way, on the boat going over. I've never seen so much food in my life. And I ate my way across the Atlantic, and I couldn't lose the 14 pounds, so I wasn't really in shape for the final race.
Zamperini finished 8th in the 5,000-meter final, but managed to run the last lap in an astounding 56 seconds. This captured the attention of an unexpected fan, none other than Adolf Hitler, who asked to meet Zamperini.
So I went over and I shook his hand. He just said one thing. He just said, "The boy with the fast finish." So actually, he thought that was the fantastic part of the race, seeing a guy gain 50 yards in one lap.
Zamperini returned to a winner's welcome from the home crowd.
They got me out of the car, sat me in this big throne-like chair and drove me into Torrance. At that time, the population was 2,000, and every single person in town, they claimed, was there, including a woman in a wheelchair. It was just unbelievable. I was embarrassed, but that was the city of Torrance then. They claimed that every single person in town was there. And that was a thrill to me to think that I had that kind of backing.
Zamperini believed his best race was 4 years away at the 1940 Tokyo Olympic Games. That race, those games, were never to be. As the world tossed and turned into World War II, the next 4 years brought more glory to Zamperini. He shattered the national collegiate mile record at USC. His training continued and World War II began. Zamperini signed up for bombardier training with the Army Air Corps and shipped to Hawaii. May 26, 1943 began like any other day on the air base. Zamperini trained in the morning, then received a call to crew a rescue mission with 11 others to search for a missing B-25. A B-24 named the Green Hornet would serve the mission. Although it had passed inspection, it had been stripped of parts to service other planes. As it hovered over the missing plane's vicinity, the number one engine's RPMs dropped suddenly. The Green Hornet shook violently. 2 of 4 engines were out. The plane dropped like a rock and exploded. Zamperini, the pilot, Francis McNamara, and tail gunner Russell Phillips were the only crew members to surface alive. Zamperini swam as fast as he could to reach a floating life raft before it drifted out to sea. Ironically, the rescue crew now waited to be rescued. They waited and waited. As sharks circled the raft, they survived on rainwater and an occasional predator before becoming its prey.
So I got this 4-foot shark in the raft, and it took about 20 minutes to open him up. And I was taught in survival school that you can eat the liver only unless the shark meat's cooked. Now, before World War II, all of our vitamin pills were made from shark liver. So we knew it was highly nutritious. Then about 4 or 5 days later, we caught another shark, which is about 3 feet long. And so on 2 different occasions, we had a luscious dinner of raw liver.
After 27 days on the raft, a sign of hope, a familiar plane with an unfamiliar red circle, the circle of the Japanese Imperial Air Force. It fired on them for 45 minutes as they pretended to be dead. Miraculously, the bullets missed the men, but it would take days to pump the water out of their shot-up raft. The 35th night would be the last for tail gunner Russell Phillips. Zamperini and McNamara said a prayer and buried him at sea. Meanwhile, back in Torrance, the Zamperinis kept a vigil for their son in spite of receiving a death certificate signed by President Roosevelt. The city had already taken the step to rename Torrance Airfield Zamperini Memorial Field in his honor. Newspapers mourned the death of the Torrance tornado. On the morning of the 47th day, was it a mirage or a miracle? Clear ahead in the distance, an island. The 2 men had drifted 2,000 miles to the Marshall Islands. Little did they know, their battle to survive was just beginning. It was a Japanese outpost where 9 U.S. Marines had already been beheaded. As prisoners to the Japanese, they survived on rice balls and water. Phillips was eventually transferred to an officers' camp. Zamperini remained and would be subjected to medical experiments by his captors. Eventually, he would be shipped to a Mori camp in Tokyo Bay, where he would come face to face with the man who would become his nemesis, Utsuhiro Watanabe, nicknamed the Bird.
This guy was, he was constantly on my case, constantly beating me over the head, in the face.
Word had spread among his captors about Zamperini's fame on the track. In 1944, the Japanese offered him a chance to deliver a radio broadcast to the U.S. To Zamperini, it was a chance to let his family know he was still alive. Zamperini was soon transferred again, this time near the snow-capped mountains 40 minutes from Nagano and far away from the bird. So he thought. It turned out the bird would be there to greet his arrival. The end of the war came not a moment too soon for the POWs in the summer of '45. In September, Louis Zamperini was finally on his way back home to Torrance. Back in the States, he met and married Miami debutante Cynthia Applewhite. They settled in Hollywood, but it was far from a Hollywood ending. He still couldn't shake the memory of the bird.
I had nightmares about this guy after the war, and it just drove me to drinking and ruined my life. I couldn't get over the nightmares.
At his wife's urging, he attended a Reverend Billy Graham crusade, a move he credits with saving his life.
When I made my confession of faith in Christ, I knew I'd forgiven them. I knew it. I knew I was through getting drunk, I was through smoking, and I had a whole new life now.
Zamperini has spent his post-war decades giving back. He started a camp for troubled boys and frequently shares his inspirational story to others, including Torrance High School students. He has never forgotten the city that served as his starting line, and it's never forgotten him. Upon his return in 1946, Torrance would rename its airfield from Zamperini Memorial Field to Zamperini Field.
Well, that was just on cloud nine. I mean, you know, all this brass here from Washington and Marshfield, and they flew in for the occasion, and they gave the dedication papers to the city, and then honored me as having the field named after me. I'll tell you, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
During a visit to the field in 1987, Zamperini would cash in on another of his 9 lives. As he co-piloted a vintage 1930 Steeman airplane to fly over the city's 75th anniversary, the plane lost oil pressure and made an emergency landing in a field south of Torrance Boulevard. Still sprightly today, Zamperini rarely turns down an invitation to celebrate his birthday in the old neighborhood. For his 89th, he received a warm welcome back at his 2028 Gramercy childhood home.
Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
This is where I grew up, my memories. This is where the transition took place, and this is where I went from a rotten, low-down delinquent and accepted by the entire school and the police force.
In late 2010, the author of Seabiscuit, Laura Hillenbrand, released this biography about Louis Zamperini, appropriately titled Unbroken. It quickly rose to the top of the New York Times bestseller list, where it's remained for more than a year. As Zamperini turns 95 this centennial year, we look to his perseverance, which personifies the spirit of Torrance and the spirit of his generation.
Tom Brokaw sent me a book 2 weeks ago. He said, "How did I miss you in my book?" Well, he wrote a book called The Greatest Generation, My Generation, but I don't like that term. My term is the hardy generation. And it doesn't have to be an old gray-haired man to be hardy. To be hardy is to overcome adversity. We had a lot of adversity in my day, and each adversity we overcame, we become more and more hardy. So what I'm saying to you young people is when you come up against a problem, don't turn your back on the problem. Just take the problem by the horns and overcome it, because every time you overcome an adversity or a problem in your life, you become more and more hardy. And that's the secret word, hardiness.
Colleen Farrell with the Centennial Oral History.